The first scratch sounded ordinary, just claws against rusted metal, but the detective standing nearby felt something shift in the silence that followed. Evening light slanted through the thin trees around the abandoned lot, washing the ground. In amber and shadow, wind dragged dust across the cracked pavement, carrying with it the faint smell of mildew and old gasoline. The car itself was a relic, a pale sedan left to rot, windows clouded, tires sunk halfway into the earth. Yet Max, the department's K9, was fixed on it with a focus that tightened every breath around him. Detective Haran adjusted his weight, one hand braced against his hip. He was not a man easily shaken. Years of searching through wreckage, backyards, and forgotten basements had dulled much of that. But Max wasn't scratching out of curiosity. His movements carried urgency, paws slamming and claws digging. His vest pulling against the leash each time he lunged at the corroded door seam. Each strike echoed too loud in the stillness. Haran's partner Ruiz stepped closer but said nothing. Both men had worked with Max long enough to read the signs. This was no false alarm, no bored animal marking his presence. Haran's eyes lingered on the dog's face. Max's ears were flattened, eyes bright with attention that bordered on grief. A low whine escaping between bursts of frantic scratching. He wasn't signaling danger, he was pleading. The kind of sound dogs made when separated from something they couldn't let go. For a moment Haran's composure wavered. The echo of years past pressing through his father's Buick, left in a field, a brother who never came home. He forced his jaw tight, grounding himself in the present. Still, the sensation stayed. Whatever Max had found inside wasn't just evidence. It was something heavier. That the lot around them was quiet, too quiet for a road that once bustled. No footsteps, no passing cars, just the faint rustle of brittle grass edging the fence line. Even the crows on the wires above had gone still, heads cocked as if watching. Haran circled toward the trunk, scanning without thinking, his instincts caught between habit and unease. Ruiz crouched by the rear door, brushing away the layers of dirt, his gloved hand hovering over the handle. He looked back once, and Haran caught at that hesitation, that unspoken question of whether they were ready to see. Max answered for them, barking once, sharp and breaking, then pressing his nose hard against the seam, his chest shuddering with the force of it. His tail wasn't wagging. It was held low, stiff, trembling, a signal Haran had never ignored. He exhaled slowly, the breath misting faint in the cooling air, and placed his hand on Ruiz's shoulder. Neither man spoke. There was no need. The choice lay there like a stone: open the car or walk away and live with the not knowing. But Max didn't allow space for retreat. He pawed once more, then sat back abruptly, head bowed, eyes fixed on the car as if waiting for it to speak. That silence pressed deeper into Haran than any cry could. Something was inside, something the dog recognized in a way humans could not. And for the first time in years, Haran felt the sting of anticipation blur with dread. The sun was slipping low now, the sedan's windows reflecting only streaks of red and gray. Every detail in the scene seemed to hold its breath. Haran reached for the door handle, his pulse steady but his chest hollow. Before he touched it, Max let out a sound Haran had never heard from him before. Not bark, not whine, but a broken note of sorrow that seemed to fracture the still air. Haran froze, his hand inches from the handle. In that fragile pause, every question thickened. What lay sealed behind the rust and grime that could draw grief from a dog trained for control? Why did it feel less like discovery and more like trespass into something that had been waiting, unseen, for too long? The handle gave way with a dry metallic groan, and the rear door cracked open just enough for stale air to escape. It carried a smell that had no single name, only the weight of time and neglect. Ruiz flinched back, pressing his sleeve to his nose, but Max surged forward, his body trembling as though something vital waited inside. Haran steadied the leash, but the dog strained against him, not with aggression, but with desperation, a pull that was less command than compulsion. Through the dim glass, the back seat revealed itself in fragments, torn upholstery curled like peeling bark, springs glinting faintly. The floor was thick with dust and leaves dragged in by mice, and there, sunk low in shadow, lay something wrapped in a thin, faded blanket. Not movement, not sound, just a presence. Haran's chest tightened at the sight, though no clear shape could be made yet. Ruiz angled his flashlight into the gloom. The beam caught on a corner of fabric, once patterned with tiny blue stars, now dulled to near gray dot. Max let out a guttural whine, the sound thick with recognition. He pawed again, but not at the door this time. He pressed against Haran's leg, head lowered, as if urging him forward but unwilling to cross the threshold himself. The detective froze. It was rare, unnerving even, to see the dog hesitate. Max had tracked fugitives through storm drains and thick woods, faced down chaos without a tremor. But here he yielded, shoulders drawn tight, eyes refusing the hollowed dark of the back seat. Haran felt the tremor move into his own bones. The lot itself seemed to shift in sympathy. A breeze stirred through the dry grass, rattling seed heads like whispered warnings. The light had drained further, turning the sedan's windows into dark mirrors that reflected only fragments of sky. Above, a cloud line thickened, dimming the last warmth of the day. Harren reached in at last, his hand brushing the blanket. It wasn't just dust that clung to it, but something softer, faint as old skin oil, the kind of trace scent that dogs remembered when humans did not. Max whimpered louder, his nose pressed hard against the gap, refusing to cross but refusing also to look away. Ruiz shifted uneasily. He was younger, less practiced at masking what lay under the work. Harren caught the subtle shake of his hand on the flashlight, saw how his gaze darted away each time the light fell too squarely on that bundle. In another context it might have been dismissed as debris, but here paired with Max's sorrow, with the sudden hollowing of the air, it could not be ignored. Harren crouched lower, fingers tightening on the fabric. The blanket gave beneath his grip with a weight far too deliberate to be empty. He stopped himself from pulling further. There was protocol, yes, but this hesitation wasn't about evidence. It was about the fracture that was already widening in the silence. Ruiz's breath sounded loud behind him, the faint crunch of his boots shifting gravel marking the distance he instinctively placed between himself and the car. Harren stayed still, bent over, one hand frozen on the cloth, his other pressed against Max's collar, feeling the dog's rapid pulse under the leather, and then it came not from the car, but from the tree line. A faint, sudden snap of wood, followed by the rush of wings. A pair of crows, startled into flight, rose black against the dimming sky. Harren turned sharply, his breath catching. Nothing else stirred, only the dark undergrowth returning to stillness. Yet the timing cut through him. The moment his hand had tightened, the forest itself had answered, as if to warn or witness that when he looked back, Max had lowered himself flat against the ground, chin pressed to the dirt, eyes fixed on Harren, with a gravity that felt almost human. Not a command, not a plea, but something in between. The kind of look that demanded patience when instinct screamed for haste. Harren eased his hand back from the blanket, slowly letting it fall into shadow again. Ruiz shifted, ready to protest, but said nothing when Harren raised his head. The decision was not final, but it was irreversible in its own way. They would not uncover what lay hidden not yet. The silence returned, heavier than before, wrapping the lot in a strange, suspended stillness. Harren rose, dust clinging to his knees, and Max finally stood, brushing against his side like an anchor. The detective's hand lingered on the dog's back, steadying himself as much as the animal. He did not need words to know they had crossed into a place where evidence and instinct no longer ran separate. The car no longer looked like a shell of metal. It looked like a vessel guarding a truth too raw to meet in daylight. Harren glanced, once at Ruiz, whose eyes darted away again. Then he turned back to the open door, the sliver of blanket visible just beyond the frame. He pulled the handle shut with a muted click, sealing the air back inside. The sound carried oddly far in the dusk. Max exhaled sharply, then sat, ears turned outward, as if listening for something neither man could hear. And in that moment, with the car once again whole and silent, Harren understood that whatever was hidden here would not be revealed without cost. It was not simply a matter of discovery. It was a matter of whether they were ready to face what Max already seemed to know. Harren's fingers tightened around the handle, the cold metal gritty with corrosion. The silence of the lot pressed in, broken only by Max's steady breathing. Ruiz moved to the far side, crouched low, his eyes fixed not on the car but on the dog. Max had shifted from frantic energy to stillness, his body angled forward, nose quivering as though every scent pulling from the crack was a story only he could read. The dog's restraint, after such desperate scratching, unsettled Harren more than the noise had. It felt like reverence, as if whatever lay inside deserved a moment of quiet. When the door gave, it did so reluctantly, groaning against years of neglect. A stale current of air drifted out, thick with the odor of damp fabric, rust, and something faintly metallic. Harren stepped back instinctively, a hand rising toward his face. Ruiz didn't recoil. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing at the shadows. Within, back seat was sagging, upholstery peeled into ribbons, but at its center something lay pressed between the cushions and the floor, small, wrapped, forgotten, not bones, not what Harren braced for. Instead, the crumpled remains of a jacket, once pale blue, faded into dust at the seams. Max edged forward, placing one paw on the threshold. He lowered his head into the car, not to tear or dig but to breathe. His chest swelled once, twice, before he let out a sound halfway between sigh and whimper. Harren glanced at Ruiz, expecting certainty, but saw only unease mirrored back. This wasn't evidence to catalogue, not yet. It was something lived in, something personal. The jacket still bore a stitched patch on the sleeve, a child's name, nearly lost in the fray of time. The sight pulled a weight through Harren's chest that no crime scene had managed in years. The wind picked up across the lot, scattering brittle leaves against the doors, their scraping whispers mimicking the tension in the men's throats. Harren straightened, forcing his gaze from the fabric to the dog. Max remained poised at the edge of the car, ears forward, tail low, his restraint deliberate. He wasn't lunging anymore. He was waiting, as if the object itself carried more meaning than what the men could yet see. Harren reached in, fingers brushing the cloth. It crumbled beneath his touch, fragile as autumn leaves, but within its folds was something harder. He drew it out carefully, a small, rusted pendant on a broken chain. The charm was in the shape of a bird, wings spread, its details dulled by years of weathering. Ruiz looked away sharply, his jaw tightening, but not before Harren caught the flicker of recognition. It wasn't the relic itself, it was what it represented. A child gone, a family waiting, a name never crossed off the missing lists. The jacket hadn't been discarded here by chance. Someone had hidden it, sealed it away in this car, left the dog to uncover what humans had failed to. Harren turned the pendant over in his palm, its edges cutting lightly into his skin, grounding him in a way he didn't want. Max lowered his head until his nose touched Harren's hand, the bird pendant between them. His eyes didn't carry triumph, they carried grief. Harren felt a tremor work through him, unbidden. The case that had led them here was never meant to brush against ghosts of the past, yet the dog's insistence had forced open a door neither man knew still stood. For the first time, Ruiz spoke, his voice so low it seemed meant for himself alone. But Harren caught the words, "She used to wear one," and then silence again, heavy, unbroken. The sky above was dimming, faint clouds bruising the horizon. Dusk carried a chill that sharpened the edges of every sound. Max shifted, stepping back from the car, but his eyes never left the pendant. Harren tucked it into a small evidence bag, though the gesture felt hollow. This wasn't just evidence, it was an echo, a fragment of a life stolen, and with it came questions more dangerous than answers. Who had placed it there, and why did Max react not with alarm but with mourning? The lot seemed to shrink around them, fences leaning closer, branches clawing faintly in the rising wind. Harren closed the door, the hollow thud reverberating too loud, final in its weight. Max pressed against his leg, the warmth steady but insistent, like an anchor against the unraveling. Harren steadied his hand on the dog's back, his breath shallow, knowing the path forward had already shifted. They weren't looking for a suspect anymore. They were standing in the shadow of someone's absence, someone whose memory had been trapped here all along. From the corner of the lot, a crow called once, harsh and cutting. Harren's eyes lifted, tracing its arc across the fading sky, but his thoughts remained tethered to the jacket, the name, and the bird charm cold against his palm. He could feel the shape of the story changing beneath him, though its full weight had yet to drop. Somewhere, in the pause between dog and man, silence and wind, the truth had twisted, and whatever they believed they were chasing was no longer what lay ahead. The door gave way with a brittle creak, hinges snapping, the silence open like a wound. The air that spilled out was stale and metallic, a weight that pressed against the lungs as if the car itself had been holding its breath for years. Harren didn't step closer at first. Max had already pressed his nose to the gap, his body rigid, ears tucked low, eyes wide in a manner not of excitement but of recognition, of memory, perhaps, though no one could name what kind. Inside, the dusk light caught on something wrapped in fabric, a pale bundle slumped against the rear seat. But a moment it was nothing more than shape and shadow. But Ruiz's breath faltered, a sound too sharp in the stillness, and Harren understood what had been revealed. Not evidence in the usual sense, not tools or weapons or money, something else entirely. Max whined again. A low vibration deepened his chest and poured at the frame as if urging them closer. Harren lifted his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the gloom. It touched on the edge of cloth, faded with age, then on the curve of a small shoe, dirt-stained but unmistakable. Harren drew the light away, not because he couldn't face it, but because he couldn't bear to see more than that just yet. The lot seemed to change in that instant. The dry wind picked up, rattling the brittle grass along the fence as though whispering through hollow reeds. Somewhere, a crow broke from the wire and beat its wings hard, black against the waning sky. Harren felt the shift not just as sound but as judgment, the world acknowledging what they had stumbled into. Ruiz took a half step back, his face turned away, but Harren kept his eyes steady on Max. The dog had eased down now, body low, head bowed, resting his nose against the dirt by the car's open door. It wasn't obedience, it was mourning, and that posture unsettled Harren more deeply than the sight inside the vehicle. A dog could be trained to detect, to pursue, to sit or to wait, but grief was not a command. For a long moment, none of them moved. The sunset painted the rusted hood in bruised reds, turning the car into a shrine no one had chosen to build. Harren's hand brushed the doorframe, and the chill of the metal bit against his skin. That contact broke something inside him, the brittle certainty of procedure, of form and report. He knew already that whatever came next would not be contained in paperwork. Max shifted then, pressing one paw onto the step of the car. Muscles taut as though resisting the urge to climb inside. His breathing quickened, and Harren noticed the detail too late. The dog wasn't simply drawn to what was visible. He was still scenting, nose lifting, tracking something beyond the bundle, something further hidden. Harren's throat tightened. If the first discovery had been enough to unmoor them, what lay deeper? His gaze swept the interior again, noting the sagging upholstery, the dark stains beneath the seat cushions, the jagged line where the carpet had been cut years before. This wasn't just abandonment, it was concealment. And Max, with his steady, sorrowful insistence, was telling them they hadn't reached the heart of it yet. The detective's pulse quickened in his wrist. He raised his light again, sliding the beam down into the shadows beneath the back seat. For a heartbeat, it caught on nothing but torn fabric and dust. Then the angle shifted, and there it was, a faint glint, a shape half buried in the debris, metallic but curved like something once held close. Ruiz saw it too and muttered under his breath, though the words barely carried. Heron did not respond. Instead, he lowered himself slowly, one knee on the dirt, until his eyes were leveled with the gap. The glint resolved into a small locket, its chain knotted in the fibers of the carpet. Its surface was tarnished, but enough of the engraving remained to suggest initials. He could not yet read them. Max whined again, softly, and settled flat to the ground, chin pressed against his paws. His eyes did not leave Heron. That stillness felt heavier than the frantic scratching that had brought them here. The urgency was gone, replaced by something harder to name, acceptance perhaps, or the weight of knowing more than the men could bear. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it the scent of rain, though the sky remained dry. Heron reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of the locket, the cool metal slick with years of dust. He paused there, hand trembling faintly, and drew back. Touching it would not just recover evidence, it would open something that could not be closed again. The evening deepened, shadows pooling beneath the car, and in the distance the crows called once more, harsher this time, as if to signal the closing of a chapter no one had chosen to write. Heron rose slowly, leaving the locket where it lay. Ruiz looked at him with unspoken questions, but Heron shook his head. For now, they stood outside the open door, the car exhaling its stale secrets into the cooling night, and Max lying quiet at their feet as though he already knew the choice was irreversible. Heron knelt once more at the open car, the fading beam of his flashlight trembling over the tarnished locket. The initials etched faintly into its surface were almost illegible, softened by time and neglect, yet they were enough to confirm what Max had known from the beginning. This was not just a vehicle forgotten at the edge of a lot. It had been a vessel of someone's last presence, a place where absence had taken root and remained long after the world had moved on. Max lay motionless now, his breathing steady, his nose resting on the earth. The frantic urgency from earlier had melted away into quiet acceptance, as though the dog understood that discovery was not always rescued, and that some wounds could not be undone by bringing them to light. Heron studied him for a long moment. He thought about all the years of searching through wreckage and ruins, always chasing answers, always believing that recovery would bring relief. But Max's stillness reminded him that sometimes the truest resolution was not in what was found, but in learning to sit beside the weight of what could never be returned. Ruiz shifted uneasily, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his shoulders bent under the unspoken truth of the scene. He did not reach for the locket, nor did Heron. They both knew that evidence would eventually be collected, photographed, catalogued. Yet tonight, in the company of the dog who had led them here, it was not an object but a memory that seemed to hover between them. A child's shoe, a locket with initials, a silence that belonged not to law but to grief. Heron let the flashlight fall, its beam dimming as it rolled against the dirt. In the gathering darkness he could hear the distant stir of leaves shifting, with the first hints of night air. Nature seemed indifferent yet strangely attentive, the rustle of branches echoing the murmur of thoughts he could not put to words. The lot, once an unremarkable scar on the edge of town, had become something else. It was not just the site of discovery but of acknowledgement, a place where loyalty had guided them to face what had been hidden. Max lifted his head slowly, eyes catching the last traces of red in the sky. There was no wag of his tail, no eager look for reward, only a solemn calm, as if his work was not to chase or seize but simply to lead, to remind the humans at his side that the past is never entirely gone. Heron reached down and brushed the dog's ear with a quiet hand. It was not thanks, not comfort, only recognition of the truth they both carried now. The air cooled further, carrying the faint cry of nightbirds somewhere across the empty fields. The world continued, indifferent yet unbroken, as if to remind them that every ending folds back into the rhythm of seasons. Heron stepped back from the car, his boots scuffing the dust, and looked once more at the outlines of rust and shadow. He realized the conflict had never been about what was inside the vehicle. It was about his own unwillingness to face that some questions are not meant to be solved, but honored by silence. Max stood then, stretching his legs, and walked a few paces away from the car. He paused near the fence line, nose lifted to the breeze, tail hanging low. He did not look back at Heron or Ruiz. Instead, he fixed his gaze outward, toward the stretch of open land where grass bent gently in the wind. That simple posture spoke more than any words, a gesture of release, a reminder that life carries forward even when the past clings to us. The sky dimmed into indigo and the lot sank into stillness. Heron closed the car door gently, not sealing it as evidence, but as a final act of respect, as though drawing a curtain over a story that had been forced to linger too long. He turned toward Max, who was already padding quietly into the tall grass, his figure blending with the dark. For a moment, Harren imagined the scene as it would appear tomorrow, only paw prints left in the dust, faint trails dissolving beneath the wind. He stood there longer than he intended, watching until the dog's outline became part of the evening, and the fence creaked with the passing of the breeze. There was no triumph here, no clear resolution, only a quiet understanding that some endings lie not in discovery, but in the dignity of letting go. The wind rose once more, lifting the dust from the ground and scattering it across the fading light, erasing the tracks as quickly as they had been made.